Good afternoon. I'm Dale Dougherty with Make Magazine and Maker Faire, and we're going to talk about the magic of making today. Thank you. I hope I'm not keeping you from lunch. Let me start by asking you a question to see how many of you work with tools. Raise your hand. Good. How many work? I'm thinking like hand tools and the powerful, loud, noisy tools. Very good, very good. Well, for those of you that don't raise your hand, this is a hand tool as well, right? This is a pretty powerful and rather noisy at times tool. We're all users of tools, and we don't often recognize them. Sometimes I think the cell phone seems to be so personal that we don't think of it as also being something on its own. But today I want to kind of ask in that question, it's like this is a chart of how the growth of cell phones use. And basically, in early 1990s, few people were using cell phones, and this only goes up to 2008. But you can see how fast the growth has been in cell phone use by so many people. And the question I want to ask is, how did so many of us become smart enough to use smartphones? How did we learn to take on these complex devices that kind of need to be managed every minute, that need to be tended to, and we have to learn new things all the time? We didn't learn it in school. We didn't learn how to use cell phones in a rather formal or procedural way. We picked it up on our own, informally. And we picked it up not only because we wanted to do it ourselves, but we talked to other people. And today I want to kind of emphasize sort of the value of informal education and the informal pathways that we use to learn. Because I think when it comes to education, informal is like magic. It somehow happens, but we don't understand how it happens. Nobody can really explain how most of the planet is using cell phones today. And, in a sense, they're using very sophisticated technology. And very little of it was formal training. Now, if cell phones were taught in schools, it would look a bit like this. This is the proper care and use of a microscope, right? And you can imagine, having a similar chart for a cell phone. And it would tell you, make sure you don't drop your cell phone and all these other things here. But I always like, before using the microscope, please read the instructions below. How many of you read the instructions in your cell phone manual before you just dove in and started using it? This is how the formal education world, I guess, thinks. Now, you would think this actually was a textbook piece, but more troubling, it's actually a test question in the California STAR test. It's a 7th grade test for in reading and comprehension. And I want you to think about how unfair this kind of assessment is of who we are and what we learn. If you had never used a cell phone and we started asking you questions about, how do you silence a cell phone? You'd be pretty baffled at how to do that. Similarly, if you've never used a microscope, having a diagram that points out the names of the parts or even a procedure to use it, it's just ridiculous. This is not how we learn. This is not even why we learn. If there was a microscope in the room, we would touch it and we would look through it. And we would say, hey, microscopes allow us to see things I couldn't see normally with a naked eye. Now, it says that here in a way, but that's information. It's not the experience of using a microscope. And in fact, they're trying to see if you can read here. They really don't care if you know what microscopes are. But indeed, if you do know what microscopes are and use them in 7th grade, you have a big advantage in just answering this question. Here's the question from the test. The microscope lens should initially be placed close to the glass slide because focus is achieved by moving closer to the specimen. You can read them. I mean, I can't answer this. I mean, when I said, I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. What's worse, though, is I didn't care. Why are they asking me this question? It doesn't matter. That's not something I would really would encounter. And I find myself getting a little bit upset, like, who are these people that think this is a relevant question? And that in this place, 41% of the students guessed C, and that's the right answer. C was to avoid breaking the glass slide when adjusting the focus. So the key thing about using a microscope is how not to break the slide, right? Not to see wonderful, amazing things in the world. But, you know, when you say 41% got the correct answer, the opposite of that is how many did not. And the purpose of questions on tests really is to see how many people can get it wrong. Because we could ask them lots of questions about cell phones, and they would all get them right, because they're all using cell phones. But we choose something they have no experience with, and we get 59% of them not passing the test. So when I mentioned cell phones, they're an example of the democratization of technology. Do you remember the first phone you used? I was talking to a gentleman today, and he said, when I was up until the age of 12, we didn't have a phone in our house. It was across the street in a store, and we had to go use it over there. And then, you know, we began getting phones in our home, and then extensions, the Princess phone. Do you remember those? But even then, we had shared lines, party lines. And you think of it today, a phone is something that's completely personal. It's your phone, your data, your network is represented through that phone. And I think it's a really fascinating development to think about, what does that mean? Because it's not just the phone, obviously. It's true of computers. It's true of the internet and the web. All during our life, these things we did not really learn in school have come down to be very personal devices that we use not just at work, but also at home and in our personal life. And I think the real idea here, you know, as a trend, is not just that the technology has become easier, we have become more capable at using it. And we don't often think about that. It wasn't just that it became, the smartphone was smart. You became smarter, and you became smarter the way you use that. But I think we're also seeing the democratization of learning. And I think we haven't seen it fully yet. But this technology is changing our lives, and our lives, because they're changing, is changing how we learn. And I think the future of education is iffy. And I mean that in the fun way that, gee, we probably don't know. It is uncertain what the future will look like. But I think it'll look like this. It will be more informal. It will involve our family and friends, and it'll be centered on you. That's what I mean by iffy. That the cell phone is an example of a technology that you've mastered because you had informal ways to learn it. You use it with friends and family and gain their knowledge, and it allows you to connect to them. But it's essentially centered on you and your goals. Now, education past and present, I think, could be distinguished as, you know, as a system that is formal, uniform, centralized, hierarchical, and standardized. Well, you know, you need to have fun and create an acronym out of that. English is a great language. We can call it FOX. But if we compare things that are iffy and things that are fox, a potluck is iffy. A cafeteria is kind of standard food in standard portions. Meetups, ad hoc, informal, versus meetings run with Robert's Rules of Order. Messaging is iffy. It's small. It comes out interactively. Letters are formal. Iffy things are more personal. They are directed by you and they are developed by you. Whereas fox, I have to be careful, I'm going to not say that word too many more times, are institutional, and they're oriented often around the institution's goals rather than your own. And I think there's something improvisational. Again, think about how you use computers and cell phones today. In many ways, it's a massively improvisational way of learning and doing things, not a systemic or systematic way of doing that. So iffy is your life, your social network, and I don't mean just Facebook, I mean the social network that you tap into through your phone, through your computer, through face-to-face. And it is the technology that's in your life. So I haven't purposely talked about making so far, but making kind of leads us into what do we do with iffy things? What do we do with iffy ways of learning? And this quote I found on a Sacramento school board, and it basically says, everything around you that you call life was made by people who are no smarter than you. And you can change it, you can influence it, you can build your own things that other people can use. Now, if there's a quote that makes me think of what making is, it's this quote. It's not about the tools, it's not about the technology, it's about what people can do and do together. Anybody know who said this? Steve Jobs. So in some ways, the person that's the father of the smartphone, goes back to the early days of the personal computer when we have makers who are tinkering and playing. And at the heart of what they wanted to do was to make things, to change things. And that is the power of your social network, of your technology. It is the power to change the world and change it as it is changing, to be increasingly in control of it. So making is iffy. It tends not to be fox, right? It tends not to fit into those formal structures. You can make it fit, and I'm not saying that the world is only iffy, but I want us to understand the value of informal education and not expect that everything has to be formalized to be successful. Play is iffy. And I think when I started Make Magazine, one of the real core concepts was that play was where we initiate our own selves into being creative and doing things and being active. And it was really a seed bed for innovation. If you want to say, well, where does innovation come from? Where does creativity come from? Well, we like those words a lot. And we like people who are creative or innovative. But we don't really know the magic behind how they got to be that way. And I think I think a good guess was they like to play. And they start by playing. They are comfortable playing. And by play, I mean they don't often know where they're going. They don't have an intent. They have sometimes not a particular purpose except to explore and discover and try things out and experiment. So as we break down making a bit, I want to give you some ways of thinking about it in a lot of contexts, but certainly in terms of education. Making is organized as projects. And I think I sort of took this from two different places. One is the open source world is organized as projects. PHP is a project. But the DIY world of magazines, such as cooking and woodworking, are largely project-based. here's something you get to do. Here's a recipe or an instruction set that allows you to do a project. And project is, when I am in the magazine, the idea of publishing details or instructions around project was to get people to do stuff. It wasn't that the project itself was a good read. It was an enabler for you to inspire you to get out there and do it. And here's an example: a globe bike, which is using electroluminescent wire wrapped around a bike. It's a fun project. It's cool. Kids like doing this. Adults like doing this. Been to Burning Man? These are kind of the recipes of Burning Man, to be honest. But here's what these instructions look like. And think of the microscope. Think of that kind of labeling and stuff. What's really cool, I think, about doing projects at a certain level is one, it's learning how to do something. But by actually doing it, you're getting feedback on whether you understand what you're doing. The lights light up, the bike glows, or it doesn't. And you begin figuring this out, not just often yourself, but with others. So behind making, and I think in an educational setting, our real interest here is not just on what you make, what the end product is. It's really on the process. I think the process of iteration, of design, build, do it again, is something that's transferable. It applies to writing essays. It applies to solving problems. And if you're doing something in electronics, it still applies in another area, such as even embroidery. So, like something like music, which we understand to some degree, you have to play music to do music, and you have to practice music. So the more times you do it, the more times you iterate, the better you get at doing that. But you get better not just at producing the outcome, you get better in terms of doing a process. So I think the third, if we talk about process and practice and projects, the other idea here is place. In our communities, we're seeing the development of maker spaces, sometimes called hacker spaces, fab labs, tech shops. They are a collection of tools and materials, but they're also a collection of expertise, of people who gather there and share their expertise with each other. Now, we see them in lots of places, mainly self-organized maker spaces for adults. It's like 12 people get together and say, hey, I don't have a garage or a shed. Let's rent this space and put tools in and we'll set it up. But pretty much it's an adult-oriented space, not something that serves kids under 18. Largely that has to do with liability and lack of supervision in these spaces. But we're also seeing places like museums, children's museums, science centers, libraries, and to a less extent schools beginning to think about maker spaces. Now, the importance of this to me is we might, like a lot of the maker movement, allow this to happen at a grassroots level, and it is spreading very quickly. But it's not necessarily spreading itself equitably across our communities. There are areas, there are neighborhoods, and this will happen more slowly. So I find myself asking, what can we do to accelerate that? What can we do to make sure that this spread of technology, this spread of opportunity happens throughout our community? Well, that's why, hello, you all went dark. That's why I think schools are vitally important here, because schools allow us to get out to more kids and in more ways give them the opportunity. And my second bet is I believe schools desperately need making to transform themselves. Now, a makerspace could have stations or tool sets around textiles or metalworking or laser cutting, computers, electronics, CNC machines, or woodworking. But it can start with really simple, basic tools and materials like hand tools. It doesn't need, you don't need the 3D printer you can get one. I hope you get one. But you don't need to start there. You need to start with making and figure out how to engage kids in making is probably the most important thing, the practices there. They can look very different. But I think the thing that's, I would say, is worth doing, you can do making as putting out a table and having an activity. But having a place matters, because then your making persists over time. The evidence of making is there, not just when you're doing it, but the projects that kids do are on the walls. The tools are out there invisible, and they speak to you. Believe me, they speak to you. They tell you that something's possible in this space that's not possible in a normal classroom. It's like going into a library and seeing what that means to you. Seeing books, at least for me, it speaks something about how much knowledge there is out there, and that I have a personal way to access that. A library or a space in a class that just has a few books is not a library. So having just a few tools or a little space, again, I think we want to adapt this to all kinds of circumstances. So we see people putting like the AV card of making together and moving it from class to class. Cool, do it. But I do want to fight for us defining physical space for making inside of schools. It's valuable. And it also allows this making to happen not just within school or within that formal structure of a class. It allows it to break out of that mold and be accessed by students who have personal projects, not just school projects. And they have their own ideas about what they want to do. It could be after school, it could be the weekend, and it could be the community that is also coming in and using the makerspace. The biggest challenge in putting makerspaces into schools, in my opinion, is not the money, it's not the space, it's not the expertise of a teacher. All of those things are important, however. But I think it's the culture of the school and whether or not you as a school encourage kids to do projects, to do work on their own, and to be creative and supportive of creative work. So this is a school in West Sacramento Prep that is one of the 15 schools we have as pilots this year for makerspaces in the Bay Area. And the kids, in a sense, what we introduced was additional tools for them to make things. But they were already making things with pen and paper somewhat, or simple craft projects. But they already had that sort of baked into their model, and it was really relatively easy to integrate making or more sophisticated forms of making into what they were doing. But, some of the value proposition around making is that we are introducing kids to creative work. We're giving them the context and the conditions under which creative work can happen. I don't believe you can teach creativity, but I believe you can create environments that are open to creativity and allowing kids to do things and to, this is a hovercraft made from a leaf blower and various other parts. So it's fun, it's interactive, but creativity has to start with the person. It has to be you wanting to do something, initiating it. And I think that's what we mean in our maker community about DIY. It's not that you have to do it alone, but you have to initiate a project. It's collaborative. You begin to meet other people. It's fun. It's a reason to be together. It's why kids are in school together. We can take advantage of the social networking that they do in school. It's generally not competitive. Make as particularly expressed in our events like Maker Faire, I'm not really concerned about who's the best or even who's the brightest. I want to see lots of output and lots of creative examples. And what I've learned is if you think you know what's going to come out when you open the door to creativity, you really don't. It will surprise you at how creative and how enthusiastic kids are to do their own work. And they actually want to help each other. They want to collaborate. And they're not really driven by a lot of the things we think they're driven in terms of gamification and other stuff. They want their own experience. They want to do something that's meaningful to them personally and that's meaningful socially to them. And that leads them to community. And maker spaces can't exist without community. I mean, we can have the tools there, we can have the tables there, we can have teachers there, we can have experts there, but without a community of people who work together, who do things and share things, we really don't have a makerspace. So when we get back into the formal or the Fox world, we kind of ask questions. Well, what's the value of making? You know, how do we know that kids are learning? Which seems a preposterous question. If you stand there and observe them, you'll see what they're doing. But I think that this troubled me for a long time, you know, and I came up with this phrase that I'd sort of use and push back to people and say, how does this affect, you know, what are your assessments for making? And it's basically that making creates evidence of learning. The student created the evidence. The evidence is the project, but it is also the artifact, the stories and the stories they tell about what they did, how they did it, and what they learned. But we can see this. Making isn't something that we have to pull out of their head. It actually is physical, and we can learn what it is and how to do it. Now, the other way I sort of look at the value of making is I talk to people, and I ask them how did they get to be who they are, and they tell me a story, usually that involves making. And this is, I won't read it all, but as a ham radio operator, after I studied engineering, I got fired from the only job I ever had and acted on a crazy idea to start my own company. I found myself soldering capacitors in a garage and still working on a prototype in the backseat of a cab. That's Mayor Bloomberg from New York talking. And he said, planning, building, tinkering, ripping up the plans, starting from scratch and rebuilding. Such a process can be frustrating, of course, but it can also be incredibly fulfilling and rewarding. So that's experience. That's not information he's talking about. And I want to create those experiences, or give those kids the opportunity to have those experiences in lots of places and in lots of ways. And I think online we have a unique potential to capture that evidence of making, create a record of participation, a record of making, and to use it to build portfolios where kids tell us what they do. They're already doing that on YouTube. They're already doing it on Tumblr. But they don't necessarily get control of those assets, if you will, to curate and tell a story about who they are as a maker. I'd like to help them do that because I think that's the kind of evidence that will help other people understand the value of making. We also started last summer a nonprofit called the Maker Education Initiative. And it sort of gets to this point here that we adopted this phrase, every child a maker. That I actually believe this is in all of us. It's not something that a few people do. It's something that everyone, given the opportunity, can do and can develop and will choose to do increasingly. You know, every year at Maker Faire, we have about 500 teachers register, and you know, there's a demand out there to be able to do this, and we're trying to figure out how to help them. But in many ways, we're trying to help them help themselves. We have, but you know, this one teacher in there says, seeing what you're doing for kids seriously brought tears to my eyes, probably because I was thinking of all of our kids who fail or barely pass science class, yet show me pictures of the things they've made and ask me questions way beyond what we're talking about in class. I need a way to keep them going in the right direction, get them motivated to work for good grades to get them into college. And I think a Makers Club is the right way to do that. So out in the maker communities, there are lots of people trying to figure out how to do this. And I just want to say, please do that. Keep going. Share what you're learning. We want to encourage and support that. We've done things like, this is makerspace.com, this Makerspace Playbook that you can download as a PDF for free is there, which if you want to start a makerspace in school, that's what you should start with. You should go to our site, and we're going to be adding more things to it, but it is a place where you can get more information about how to make it. And we don't have all the answers, and we're not going to organize, and be some, centralized resource for all that. The maker community is distributed. It's because each of you do something and become makers and help other people become makers. But you can do these things. You can become an advocate in your own community. But please try to engage the whole community. Find people that are outside your own network and involve them. Organize a maker fair in a school or a library, a neighborhood. Start planning to build spaces and outfit them at any level, in any kind of place. It costs money, but not that much. Build a community of mentors and supporters. We started a program last week, Maker Moms, that there are a lot of people out there that have kids that they want to get involved, and they're not necessarily able to do a lot themselves. They want to help do some of the facilitation and support to make this happen. And through makerspace.com and through me personally, let us know what you're doing. Let us know what you're trying. Experiment and try things. That's pretty much the maker spirit. So, in the spirit of this, of just making is iffy, it's an informal pathway for learning, involving your friends and family, the whole community, but it's, instead of us as adults centered on us, I want it centered on youth. And how can we work with youth-serving organizations to expand their capacity through summer camps and after-school clubs or in-school programs to deliver making? And I'd like to close with a letter that I just received from a young maker. His name's Duncan, and he graduated in 2012. And, honestly, this is a better example than I could write myself of what I think the benefits are and what we're trying to do. He writes, "I think I was always a maker at heart. I used to make all kinds of swings out of rope and whatever else was lying around on the house or garage. I was a sophomore when my parents agreed to take me to my first maker fair. We spent the entire day looking at every booth and every display and as many of the events as we could get to. I thought it was so cool the way that everyone had all these different ideas that they were working on. We all came home full of ideas of things we could do at home, and I spent the summer working on kits we bought at the maker fair, like the TV Be Gone, and following simple projects on Instructables. By the time I went back to school in the fall, I was still very interested in making, hacking, and designing, and more interested in computers than ever. And I realized that there were a lot more opportunities at school to pursue those interests, so I started hanging around those places more and more. The Venture Academy, which he attended, allowed me time and access to materials and a place to work, and people that I could learn other skills from, which is really the most powerful way that making changed my life, because it helped me to be less shy and seek out others with the same interests. As a result, I made great new friends, met the classmate that became my best friend, and associated with some really great mentors that I'm still in touch with today. Before I thought being a maker meant being someone who tinkered alone in a garage. But now I see that being a maker is about being a collaborator, a student, a teacher, and a craftsman in just about every aspect of my life, from the car I drive to the kind of environment I create and choose to live in every day." So Duncan, at age 18, is just a model maker that I can't think, how do we create more Duncans? And I look at the letter and I think, well, what if he didn't go to Maker Faire? What if he didn't have these experiences at home? Would he have had this success at school? Would he have written, as he went back and revised, in a sense, his own history, to say, I was always a maker at heart? That identity comes after we've had a set of experiences that affirms it. And my goal is to give more kids that kind of opportunity to have those experiences and become makers. Thank you very much. So we have a few minutes for questions. If there is a mic, I think they prefer it so they can we can record your question. If you wouldn't mind identifying yourself and your organization, that would be helpful.
Dale Nelson Heller from Heller Results, and I'm curious what you're learning from your 15 pilot schools about the sort of cultural integration where there's friction and where it seems to work, how you deal sort of with those.
Yeah. Well, I have to say the schools that we've worked with so far all have been really big supporters of this. And I have to say, I'm not meeting with great resistance from schools when we go talk to them. This is not a question of why, it is a question of how. But usually when I get someone, whether a principal or superintendent or someone coming in, they go, I got kids that this really will work for, that this will mean a lot to, and that's usually the starting place. And then we discover there's more of those kids and more ways to work together. I think the thing that we're learning from those pilot schools is the ramp up for teachers is difficult, or we need to help them as much as we can. Some of it is in figuring out projects and figuring out things they can do. Kits have a big role in this. I meant to introduce this earlier, but it's amazing how fun this is for kids. To make something that just turns lights on and off and blinks in fun ways. This is called a Larson scanner, and and you can control the speed of it and things like that. Well, simple kits like this, after you learn to solder and stuff, are the kinds of projects that they can start with before they come up with their own ideas. But I would say that we have to be building this community of practice around teachers. How do we do this at scale? And I think that's kind of the frontier that we're at right now. How do we get not just 15 schools or hundreds of schools, but how do we get lots of schools involved, and what will that take? We've certainly benefited from having champions in these schools, of people that get this and want to do it. Next question.
Hi, Brandon from Ohio with Education Management Organization, and I'll definitely check out the web more, but do you have any partners right now, or any schools that you know of that are in like the K2, even K6 range, that have maker spaces or have specific projects that we might be able to take back and either implement or create ourselves?
Well, that's pretty young. For some of it, but there's another answer to that. A lot of kindergarten stuff is close to making already. It's the problem is we start eliminating that from the curriculum as the kids get older. So by the time they're in middle school and high school, they don't have Legos around anymore. They don't have fun things to play with and build, and they're not encouraged to do that. If you see me afterwards, I could probably connect you with a few. Definitely, people are interested in creating maker spaces at that level. I haven't put personally a lot of energy into that level. I'm really kind of more interested in high schools and middle schools, but we can find some that are doing that.
Hi, Julie Shannon with Girl Start. We do STEM education for girls. We're creating a maker space right now, and what is your advice on engaging more girls in making? Emphasize the creative side of what we're doing. There are, crafting and particularly e-textiles is a great starter area for a lot of kids. Even in the maker area, the conductive, Faire conducting or something like that is there. Look at some of their projects and kits. I think, there is definitely a strong tendency among boys to find this more interesting than girls, and partly, to me, a great make project is a technical project that's inside of a creative project, and I think you can emphasize one or the other depending on your audience. So, the idea that you can have multiple possible outcomes from a set of materials or a project, rather than do this right, I think is a mindset that we'd like to have. And I think, increasingly there are really some great women makers out there to follow and be inspired by as well. So it's often the mixing of different things. What I was sort of proud of, we started featuring, when we started Maker Faire, we included craft quite a bit. And again, it's a traditional female area.
but it brought women to Maker Faire, and they were hanging out at CNC machines and 3D printers and everything else. And so we start, the goal really is to mix the community together and blend it in more ways than one. But, we can figure out almost from wherever someone wants to start. And I think that the key in whether it's girls or others that may not identify as makers is say, well, what are you interested in? And if it's music, they can start with music and they can make instruments or other kinds of things. Try to answer more quickly.
Dean
Yes.
Hyman from a company called Brain Pop. And I was wondering if you can expand a little bit on how you stand with kids creating virtual stuff, so specifically apps, games,
Yeah.
movies.
Well, I have I've been talking to the Mozilla folks and others about they're kind of starting to appropriate the word making to apply to the web. And I think it's fine. I don't think there's anything, I'm not saying, that's a bit why I'm trying to get at like the iffy concept is how did this generation of programmers learn to program? They didn't go to computer science schools. They picked it up because they wanted to build a game or later build a web page. So I think these things are accessible in informal ways to kids, and I would very much like the two sides of making, sort of digital and physical, to combine. In many ways, when we talk about things like 3D printer, they're creating things, digital model on a computer and then using a device to render it. But I find myself only wanting to raise a flag in that I think we are missing the physical sometimes because we focus on the digital. Teaching kids to sketch or draw is a good way to get them into 3D design. Just getting them into a computer program, often they're confused and they don't understand it well enough. So there's a bit of a ramp up in there. But, I want kids, that's part of the portfolios. I want them to be, I think they should be taking the things that they create and sharing them and using that as a kind of currency on the web, building websites or whatever to do that. So I think I just felt like we're sort of going very fast down the app road and everything else. I don't want us to leave the physical world out of this equation, but connecting the physical and digital is really important to me.
Hi, Dale. My name is Ludwig Herrera, and I work helping in higher education. I work helping a middle school club and a creativity club, which you could relate as a makerspace. But something that I didn't hear from you, and I think it has been in the US for now several decades, is one of the more well-rounded makerspaces of all, which would be the 4-H clubs. They do a lot of stuff that has been not only in farm creation or any crafting for women, but it has been, my kids are in there, they learn robotics. They learn how to create rockets. They learn all of this great technology by making. And their hacker spaces, at least in North Dakota, are places that institutions, either elementary schools, middle schools, or even the universities, are giving them rooms on Saturdays and Sundays where they can come and create. And all the community itself is providing with all these tools for them to be helped. So I don't know if this is in the nationwide, but I think, I have been following your magazine for several years now, but I think it is maybe that we are all so independent that we don't see where relations can be formed. So.
No, I think it's a good idea. I've talked to 4-H. They sort of get some of it. I think historically it's very true, but they, I would say for them, while they have updated the curriculum, I met the guy that did the robotics stuff. There's a lot of, 4-H and the Extension Service was created to spread innovation into rural communities, and I think they should adopt making as part of that more consciously. There's also the Faire connection and other things where kids are exhibiting at the Faire, which is very similar to what we're doing. And I actually spent the first year of college working for 4-H, so I have a real interest and respect for that, but I haven't found them really the uptake to be that good as an organization, to be honest. Thank you.
Jim Farrell, I'm interested in how making is a very concrete act, but it also helps to teach abstractions. and there's a real way to reach over multiple intelligences, different people's learning styles, and that kind of thing. I'm interested particularly in what has been done, or if you've seen anything done, reaching people with developmental delays or special needs as a way of taking people who are, some people who are very, very concrete in their view of the world, and helping them to activate different intelligences and also to get a better understanding of abstractions as a result.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot wrapped into that. I mean, in terms of, I think one of the important places for making in schools is it is a different learning methodology that allows different kinds of people. Earlier talking, I mentioned kids with some degree of Asperger's or autism tend to do making really well, and even what's neat is it's not just the development of the project, but even the exhibition, being out in public and talking about it seems to click for them, and their parents say, hey, my kid would never talk to strangers that way, but at a Maker Faire, they're going all day long. I'm not sure about the connections to abstraction. I don't really study that. I think, one of the areas that I struggle with a bit is that school is too abstract in what it is offering, and kids don't see the practical everyday connection to that. So I'm coming at it from a different place. I do think they line up and can line up later, but I think our goal often is to push abstract thinking too early into kids' lives, and because it's somehow easier for us to do that through textbooks and testing, but it doesn't really mean that it benefits them or that it's a predominant way of learning.
Hi, I'm Sharon Gowan, publisher of Family Life magazine, and I've served on school boards before. I'm wondering if the schools are opening up some of their shop classes as maker spaces in the schools you're working with in California.
I have gotten some schools to revisit their shop class. Sometimes it was been mothballed. The machines are in the back of the room and turned into a conventional class, and the recovery of those classes. I was talking just in our local community, and someone was saying, we used to get all our machine equipment from the schools who were giving it up, but that has seemed to stop. Either they're run out or they're not such a good supply anymore. I think we can reinvent shop class. I'm not interested so much in it as the trade thing. I think that's too narrow a framing because most of those trades will not be relevant always. But I think as a learning methodology, just getting in there, getting your hands dirty, making things, I think you can connect back to mainstream learning if you need to, or just find other paths. So shop classes, it's sad. You go to a lot of schools, particularly in California, you see the building that used to be the shop class. And you got to ask, well, why did that go? And some will say, well, liability, and others will say, well, the instructor passed away, and we just didn't have anybody else who understood the machines. But I actually think parents didn't demand that it stay open. They didn't see much value. In fact, they worried that Johnny or Jane would be confined to manual labor in their life if they took a shop class. Take the AP class instead. And I think we still fight that out in the world, quite a bit of a sort of false distinction between mental and manual labor, whereas there are people that are thinking, in terms of the last question, they use the phrase embodied learning, that we learn through our hands, we learn through our minds, and they're integrated, they're not separate.
Hi, I'm Terry Sperry with Alted Austin and the Austin Mini Maker Faire. The Maker Faire is coming up May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, and we're currently accepting maker registrations and sponsorships. So you can go to austinmakerfaire.com and learn all about it. But I do have a question also. I was wondering if you could talk about the role of apprenticeships in encouraging children to become makers.
Yeah. Well, it's a good idea. I mean, it goes back to the guilds kids want to do real things, and to get them out of school sometimes into the world, or have the world come into the school and give them the opportunity to try and learn to do things, whether it's welding or web design. I think it's a good way for them to gain work experience. There is no formal means that I know of in our community for doing that today. There may be one day, but it's kids who connecting a student with someone who does this professionally, I think is a great idea. We can call it whatever we want for as long, but I think those experiences are quite meaningful. And the interesting thing is a lot of those businesses actually, have the attitude that they can't find those kids anymore, that they don't exist in their community. So there could be a good marriage or matchmaking there that happens. Okay, I think I want to thank you all. Oh, I'm sorry.
I have one question.
Yes.
One question. And you can pass on this if you'd like. Can you comment on the social phenomenon that's happening right now, the rise of maker space and this concept of makers, and the social phenomenon of online standardized tests for the country? I mean, it's kind of like two opposite phenomenon happening at both the same time, and how do you think they'll interchange?
Well, I think I did in my talk already, just kind of characterize, these are two different camps. I think you can take making and try to fit it into some formal hierarchical system, but I don't think that's really its strength, and you're missing out on its benefits. And again, my example of the microscope is like, what are we really testing? I'm sympathetic to measurement and everything, but what I'm really interested in is how do we develop young people? How do they grow in terms of their capabilities and skills to participate in the world around them and have the ability to change it and gain control of it along the lines that Jobs hinted at? That's what I care about. I don't really care about sort of the educational bureaucracy that wants to mandate bodies and control bodies of knowledge. I think it's not about information today. That information's through your cell phone. It's available all the time, everywhere. It really is, how do you create paths? How do you create sets of experiences that are meaningful in developing and improving kids' lives? So thank you all very much today, and I hang around and talk to you later.